We have been spending the last few shirim talking about the Shlosh Shavuos, which almost all of anti-Zionistic theology is based upon. And we have given 3 reasons why they do not apply. One is that we received permission from the nations of the world, from the rulers of Eretz Israel at the time, to return, and therefore the Shavuos no longer apply. 2, the nations of the world broke their Shavua not to oppress us too much. Anyone who thinks that the Holocaust and the Chmielnicki pogroms, where historians estimate between 500,000 and 2 million Jews died, not going on from there, wasn't oppressing the Jewish people too much, needs their head examined. And once the non-Jews do that, then we're no longer bound by our part of the Shavuos. The Maharal says there was no Shavua to begin with, that HaKadosh Baruch Hu had to create something new to allow the Jewish people to exist in Galus. HaKadosh Baruch Hu changed the nature of the world so that the Jewish people could be out of Eretz Yisrael for 2,000 years and that still be an extant people that wanted to return. There's also another one that is the Shlosh Shavuos never applied at all because they weren't mentioned in any of the Sifrei Halacha. Now, after the first edition of this Sefer was printed by Rav Druckman Zatzal, he received many, many questions on this perek, in writing, by phone, people coming to see him. And 5 of them, they can be divided essentially into 5 categories of the questions that were either extremely common or someone might think there's rationale behind it. And we're going to discuss those questions and the answers to them. Now, many, many people ask the same question. So when the Rav Zatzal put them together, in the Sefer, he put them together in the strongest possible way. So the first question is that the Arabs didn't give us permission to settle in Eretz Yisrael. And he phrases the question as follows. In the beginning of our perek, it says that Israel received permission from the nations of the world to establish a national homeland in Eretz Yisrael. Israel did receive permission from the British, from the League of Nations, from the United Nations, but from the Arabs in Eretz Yisrael and the Arabs throughout the world, we did not receive permission, and they were opposed to our settlement. And since they were opposed to our settlement, therefore, it still violates the Shavua. Rav Druckman's response is as follows. It is true that the Arabs in Eretz Yisrael were opposed to the Balfour Declaration, to the League of Nations mandate, to the United Nations decision of the establishment of Eretz Yisrael. But why should we relate to what the Arabs in Eretz Yisrael thought or what the Arabs in the world thought? They have not ruled Eretz Yisrael the Ottomans lost control of Eretz Yisrael in 1919, and they were Turks. And they had ruled Eretz Yisrael for 500-600 years, something like that. So to receive permission, for instance, it's sort of like buying Manhattan. When the Dutch came and there were Indians fishing there, and they wanted to buy Manhattan, the island, from the Indians. And the Indians weren't from there. They had come from upriver to fish for the day. And they said, sure, we'll sell you the island. It's not ours. Right? They didn't control the land. They didn't own it. Why should we be asking them for permission from it? Not only this, the Maharsha says that in the time of the return to Zion, there is a necessity to receive permission to build Eretz Yisrael. And it's similar to what it occurs in Sefer Nehemiah. Lechu v'nivnei es chomos Yerushalayim v'lo niyeh od cherpa. Let us go build the walls of Yerushalayim, and that we should no longer be an embarrassment among the nations. And the Maharsha says, Perishus HaMelech Hayat. It was in the permission of Koresh. Koresh was the king who ruled it at the time. And when you read through Sefer Nehemiah, you see that the people that were living here at the time had massive objection. When we were building the temple, people had to keep a sword or a spear in one hand at all times as they were working to build the walls of Yerushalayim, to build the city, to build the Beis Hamikdash, because the people in the land were opposed to it. There was no question in Nehemiah's eyes that he should approach the people in Eretz Yisrael, only those that ruled Eretz Yisrael. Also, when we started to come back, the first Aliyah, it was individuals coming. No one had any idea whatsoever of having any type of military force. In fact, it was much, much later. The original Jewish settlements hired Arab guards. We didn't defend ourselves. It was Ben Gurion that decided that Jews have to defend themselves. And there are many stories there's one story about how he convinced the people that we have to defend ourselves, that buying off the Arabs doesn't actually work. So since we did not come to conquer the land, there can be no thought at that point in time of Yachad B'choma, that we're coming up together with the force to conquer the land. And even today, the name of the Israeli army is Tzva Haganah Yisrael, the defense force of Israel, not an army of conquest. So, given all of these things, it's difficult to understand why we should be interested in what the Arabs think about it. They were not the people that were in control. Question 1. If people have questions about these, please contact me, put a note in the YouTube thing, and I will respond to it, or maybe respond if there are many people who have the same question in the video, because other people might have that question. All right, second question, the opinion of the Maharal. The Maharal says it's Gezeros Hashem, that God decreed, he changed the nature of the world. But the Gemara says it's Shavuos. How is it possible that the Maharal is changing the Gemara, which says Shavuos, and it's learned out of a pasuk, Hishpati eschem benos Zion, I adjure you, benos Yerushalayim, the daughters of Jerusalem, out of these pasukim in Shir Hashirim, which says the word Hishpati, Shavua, the Gemara says Shlosh Shavuos, there are 3 Shavuos. How can he change that to Gezeros? The answer is the Maharal clearly was not ignorant of the fact that the Gemara said Shavuos and not Gezeros. However, this is not the type of Shavua that is the Shavua of the Torah that says Lo Yachel Devaro, that is, he will not profane his word. It's a different type of thing. It's talking about what Klal Yisrael does, what the nature of the nations of the world are going to do, and so on. And the Maharal is explaining how we are supposed to understand the 3 Shavuos that are at the end of Kesuvos that are learned from the Megillah Shir Hashirim, and so on. This type of explanation of a God is quite normal, and see a little bit more about this in the next question, so I'm going to hold off the second half of the answer, as does Rav Druckman. The third question is Hishpat HaGoyim, the Shavua of the nations. That one of the Shavua was that the nations shouldn't oppress Israel too much. How did they get this Shavua was one of the things that the Rav Druckman said. Mori Verbi said, we don't find any place that the nations of the world had such a Shavua. So the question is, cannot our king, the king of all kings, can't he make anyone take a Shavua? That can't he command Bnei Noach to make a Shavua just as much as he can make us take a Shavua? So Rav Druckman says, Malkeinu melech malchei hamlachim yachol lasos kachol shiyotzei. HaKadosh Baruch Hu, the King of Kings, can do whatever he wants. But we do not find any place where HaKadosh Baruch Hu stood in front of the nations and made them take a Shavua. And to take Chazal's words literally is in the Agadic sections. I'm not talking about the halachic sections, I'm talking about the Agadic sections, is foolish. Look at the Akdama of the Rambam to Perek Echelek, to how you're supposed to understand the Gadas Chazal. Look at the Ramban. Both of them say we're not supposed to take these things literally. We have to understand the message of it, not the literal meaning of it. If you take every one of the Agadas Chazal in the literal meaning, you'll find so many contradictions. You won't be able to begin to move. So it's not as if HaKadosh Baruch Hu is standing before the nations, but the Maharal explains this by saying HaKadosh Baruch Hu created a system where the Jews would be able to exist among another country and retain who they are with their loyalties to their nationhood and religion, even when this is not normal. For instance, in the United States, the many people in the United States know what their ancestry is, but they do not think of themselves as British, German, French, Irish, whatever. They consider themselves Americans of Irish descent. The people in the United States, German was the second most spoken language in the United States in the Second World War, and the Americans of German descent fought just as much as anyone else did against Germany in the Second World War. They didn't feel any type of contradiction in that. However, Jews do not assimilate in the same way, right? We maintain, or we have maintained over 2,000 years, a separateness that is not normal. And that is part of these Shavuos, or as the Maharal explains it, the Gezeres of Hashem. The fourth question is that the argument brought in this chapter is that we do not find the Isser of these Shavuos in any of the Sifrei Halacha. The question is, this isn't an argument at all. Why? Because when you learn in Chumash, Lo Yachel Tavaro, Kachol Yotzei Mipiv Yaseh, you will not allow your word to be profaned. Everything that comes out of your mouth you will do. We learn all of Hilchos Shavuos with that. And when you learn Hilchos Shavuos, so this is a Shavua, and therefore I don't have to tell you what the halachos of this, what this is. It's just included within Hilchos Shavuos. So Rav Druckman's response is the three Shavuos that were not mentioned by any posek. It is not reasonable to say that in all of Nedarim and Shavuos you would not have this at all. It is such an important halacha. If there were a prohibition to move into Eretz Yisrael, you would expect the Rambam to have it. And even more so, you would expect the Shulchan Aruch to have it. Why? The Shulchan Aruch and the Torah, for instance, only talk about the halacha that's relevant before Mashiach comes. right? Once Mashiach comes, all the halachas that occur when Mashiach comes, Hilchas of the Mashiach, the Rambam talks about that, but the Torah and the Shulchan Aruch don't. Since this is a halacha that only applies until Mashiach comes, you would expect them to stress it more than anything else, but they don't mention it at all. Further, this is my point, not Rick Drickman's point. If you want to say all you have to do is learn Hilchos Shavuos and then you know everything else, then the Torah and the Shulchan Aruch and the Rambam shouldn't have written anything else at all, because we are Nishbaim va'omdim mehar Sinai, that we took an oath, the Jewish people took an oath at Har Sinai to keep the Torah. So therefore, all we have to learn is Hilchos Shavuos, and therefore from that we can learn out everything else we're supposed to do. It doesn't work that way, because how would we know what all these details were, exactly how to do it? Things that are mentioned in the Gemara are much more flushed out by the time you get to the Torah and the Shulchan Aruch. It would not be that they would ignore an important halacha, right? Because you'll learn it when you learn Hilchot Shavuos. What do you mean? If that's true, then I don't have to put in treifas, because we're told in the Chumash not to eat a treifa. So what do I need Hilchot treifas for? Told I have to slaughter the animal in a certain way. So what do I need Hilchot Shechita for? We're told you have to keep Shabbos. So what do I need Hilchot Shabbos for? It's the Shavua that we took at Har Sinai. Therefore, we know this, so I don't have to do anything else. The details of exactly how to do those things are what the Shulchan Aruch is coming to teach us. All the Sifrei Halacha are coming to teach us. And therefore, to say that they would be omitted because it's part of Hilchos Shavuos simply doesn't make sense. An important halacha has to be there, otherwise we would have no way of understanding it. The last question, which Rav Drickman took the most time to discuss, is concerning the Ramban's opinion on what Kivush Haaretz is. In our Perek, we brought the Rambam on his notes to Sefer HaMitzvos, and he brings that there is a mitzvah of kivush, of conquering Eretz Yisrael, in every generation. However, there are different ways of doing this. There is a mitzvah of kivush, and there's also a shavua, but there is no contradiction between them. You can fulfill the mitzvah of kivush haaretz by living in Eretz Yisrael, and without conquering it. So what the Rambam is saying, nitztavnu b'kivush, that we're commanded to conquer the land, is not the mitzvah to conquer it by warfare, but by simply living in Eretz Yisrael. And by living in Eretz Yisrael, we can affect kivush haaretz, conquering the land, without transgressing the shavua. So Rav Drickman responds, and I'm going to do this more carefully close to what he says. Then I have the others summarizing and or expanding on what he said. First, if it were in our hands to fulfill the mitzvah of Yeshuva Aretz, which includes Jewish independence, Israelite independence and rule and freedom in Eretz Yisrael without war, we would be very happy to do this. If there would be a shavua or there wouldn't be a shavua, it wouldn't matter. If we didn't have to do this, do we look for warfare? Do we look for war? There's a Yiddish phrase that runs, better a bad peace than a good war. But what does it say? We did not choose to fight for our existence. Those that hate us, that desire to rule over us and over Israel, that have spoken many times, and they still say this if you bother to listen to their Arabic broadcasts, to sweep us into the sea. They forced us to use weapons of war. Even before the establishment of the state, they were fighting against us, physically attacking us. even though we made many, many efforts to make peace with the Arabs that were surrounding us. Second, how can you quote the Rambam, who says, this is a direct quote, Nitztavinu b'kivush, that we are commanded to conquer, to say that there is no mitzvah to conquer. The Rambam knew how to express himself. He was a master of verbiage. If he wanted to say, you conquer the land by living in it, he would have said that. He wouldn't have said, you are commanded to conquer the land. The Rambam writes, Shenitztavnu l'reshet haaretz, we are commanded to inherit the land. V'lo nezva b'yad zulaseinu min ha'umos, or l'shomama. We're not allowed to leave it in the hands of anyone else other than us from the nations of the world, or to allow it to be desolate. What does he says? Zulaseinu min ha'umos. Anyone other than us from the nations. That means that the rule of Eretz Yisrael has to be handed. If someone would give us the rule of all of Eretz Yisrael without having to fight, brachim hema, they would be blessed for such a thing. But they don't exactly want to cooperate with such a thing. So what can we do? Are we supposed to raise our hands? How can we, if we raise our hands in surrender, how can we fulfill the mitzvahs of Hashem our God, who commanded us, as the Ramban says, to conquer the land? The Ramban continues, and he says, "Ve'araya shezu mitzvah," and the source, the proof that this is a mitzvah, Omer yitaleh b'inyan hameraglim, HaKadosh Baruch Hu said concerning the spies, Alei Rash, Al Tira ve'al Techas. You should go up, you should not be afraid, and you should not tremble. Now, if we're not going to war, if this is a completely peaceful thing, why would we be afraid? Right? You're afraid when you're going to war. If I'm going to do something completely and totally peaceful and there's going to be no conflict involved, what am I afraid of? And the Rambam stresses as he goes on, V'zu hi shachamim korein osa milchemes mitzvah. And this is what the chachamim call milchemes mitzvah. V'hu mechazek, and he strengthens his words from other sources as well. And you look at the Hasagos of the Ramban there to see it all. And he continues to stress that this is the war against the 7 nations that rule Eretz Yisrael. But the commandment to conquer Eretz Yisrael in all generations, this is now a quote from Rambam, Aval haaretz lo naniach osam biyadam. But we cannot leave Eretz Yisrael in their hands, v'lo biyad zulasam min ha'umos, and not from any of the other of the nations, bedor min hadoros, from any generation within all of the generations of time. So you cannot say the kivush, the conquest of the land, the Rambam is saying, is not actually conquest. The Ramban is telling us that there's a mitzvah to conquer the land and to dwell in it. After we've cut out all of the nations from Eretz Yisrael, Im ratzu achar ken teinu la'azov es haaretz v'lichvosh lehem es eretz sinar. If after we've conquered Eretz Yisrael, we say, you know what, we don't want to go here. We want to go to the land of Sinar, or Eretz Ashur, or Assyria, v'zulasam mina makomos, or any other place in the world. Einam rashayim. The Rambam says we're not allowed to do that. Shenitztavinu b'kivush u'b'yeshivata, because we are commanded in conquering the land and living in it. And he equates this to the wars of Yahushua. Opening quote, Umamram milchemes Yahushua lichvosh titen ki hamitzvah hazu hi bekivush. That they say that the war of Yahushua has conquered the land. So we see that the mitzvah for us today, the Ramban is saying, is to conquer the land. Did not Yahushua fight a war? Open up Nach. And he said, and he stresses again, V'hari nitztavanu b'kivush b'kol hadoros, and we are commanded to conquer the land in all the generations. In all of this, we see that there is not even a hint in the Rambam that there is an isser of a shavua, of the three shavuos, the three oaths, or anything else. Can it occur to anyone that the Ramban, one of the greatest lights among the Rishonim for the Jewish people, would trip people up with if there were a prohibition of conquering Eretz Yisrael, right? It's impossible to write such a thing about the Rambam. He says there's a mitzvah in every generation to conquer the land just the way Yahushua did, and therefore it is very clear that the Ramban, is talking about us conquering Eretz Yisrael right now, in our times, as it is in every time, and that he does not believe that there is any force to the three Shavuos mentioned at the end of Masachet Shavuos, other than as a Nagadic thing. Perhaps he understands it as the Maharal does, or some other way, I don't know, but he clearly does not understand it as a prohibition upon us of conquering by military force Eretz Yisrael in our times. Everyone should have a wonderful day.